Story 1. The Family in the Broken Down RV. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly in every direction, nothing but scrub brush and heat mirages dancing on the asphalt. I was driving from Las Vegas to Denver, a 12-hour journey I'd made dozens of times for work. My job in pharmaceutical sales required constant travel, and this particular route had become as familiar as my morning commute back home in Colorado. It was mid-July 2019, and the temperature gauge in my rental car showed 108 degrees outside. The air conditioning was working overtime, but I could still feel the desert's relentless heat seeping through the windows. I'd been driving for about 6 hours when I saw them, a massive RV pulled over on the shoulder about a quarter mile ahead, its hazard lights blinking weakly in the blazing sun. As I got closer, I could see it was one of those older Class A motorhomes, probably from the early 2000s, with faded brown and tan stripes along the sides. Steam was pouring from under the hood, and the whole vehicle seemed to sag under its own weight. A family stood beside it, a father in his 40s wearing a sweat-stained tank top, a mother holding a crying toddler, and 2 older kids who looked miserable in the heat. I'm not usually the type to stop for strangers, but something about seeing that family stranded in the middle of nowhere made me pull over. The father waved gratefully as I approached, sweat beading on his forehead despite the baseball cap he wore. "Thank God," he said as I rolled down my window. "We've been stuck here for over an hour. Radiator just gave out completely. You wouldn't happen to have any water, would you?" I had a few bottles in my cooler, meant for the rest of my drive, but I handed them over without hesitation. The man introduced himself as Dave, and his wife Linda thanked me repeatedly while giving water to the kids. The toddler had stopped crying and was now staring at me with those big, curious eyes that kids get. "Where are you folks headed?" I asked, genuinely concerned about their situation. "Phoenix," Dave replied. "My brother lives there. We were supposed to be there by tonight, but..." He gestured helplessly at the RV. "I called for a tow, but they said it could be 4 hours before anyone can get out here, maybe longer." The thought of this family sitting in that metal box for 4 more hours in this heat made my stomach turn. The RV would become an oven. I checked my phone. No signal, which wasn't surprising out here. The nearest town with services was probably 40 miles away. "Look," I said, making a split-second decision that would haunt me for months afterward. "I can't fit all of you, but I could take your wife and the kids to the next town, get them out of this heat while you wait for the tow truck." Dave and Linda exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. There was something in their eyes, relief, but also something else. Something that should have made me reconsider. "That's incredibly kind of you," Linda said, her voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. "Are you sure you don't mind?" 20 minutes later, Linda was in my passenger seat with the toddler on her lap, while the 2 older kids, a girl about 8 and a boy maybe 10, were buckled in the back. Dave stayed with the RV, waving goodbye as we pulled away. In my rearview mirror, I watched him grow smaller until the desert heat haze swallowed him completely. The first 30 minutes were perfectly normal. Linda was pleasant conversation, telling me about their move from Oregon to Arizona for Dave's new job. The kids were well behaved, occasionally asking, "Are we there yet?" but mostly content to stare out the windows at the passing landscape. The toddler had fallen asleep, his little head resting against Linda's shoulder. Then, Linda asked me to pull over. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice suddenly different, flatter, more controlled. "Could you stop at that rest area up ahead? The baby needs changing." I could see the rest area she meant, maybe a mile ahead. It was one of those basic desert stops, just a few picnic tables, some trash cans, and a small building with restrooms. No other cars were visible in the parking lot, which wasn't unusual for this time of day in the middle of nowhere. As I pulled in, something felt wrong. The older kids, who had been chattering normally just minutes before, had gone completely silent. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, they were both staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Not the vacant stare of bored children, but something much more focused and unsettling. Linda unbuckled her seatbelt and opened her door, but instead of getting out with the toddler, she turned to me. "Could you help me with the diaper bag? It's pretty heavy." The diaper bag she was referring to was a large canvas tote she brought from the RV. It was sitting on the floor behind my seat, and when I turned to grab it, I noticed it was oddly heavy for baby supplies. More than that, it was making a soft metallic sound when I moved it, like tools clinking together. "Actually," Linda said as I lifted the bag, "could you carry the baby for me? My back is killing me from sitting in that RV all morning." She was already transferring the toddler to me before I could respond. The little boy was surprisingly heavy, and as I adjusted my grip, I felt something that made my blood run cold. Under his shirt, wrapped around his tiny torso, was what felt like duct tape, not a diaper, not clothing, tape wound tight around his middle. The toddler's eyes opened as I held him, and he looked directly at me with an expression no child that young should have. Pure, calculated awareness. Then he smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp, filed to points. That's when Linda's hand moved to the diaper bag, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a zipper being pulled back. In my peripheral vision, I caught a flash of metal, something long and thin that definitely wasn't baby supplies. I didn't think, I just reacted. I shoved the toddler back at Linda and dove toward my car door, scrambling to get behind the wheel. Linda lunged after me, whatever she'd pulled from the bag now clearly visible, a long, thin knife with a serrated edge. The two older kids were already moving, unbuckling their seatbelts and reaching forward. The girl's small hands grabbed my hair, yanking my head back with surprising strength, while the boy wrapped his arm around my throat from behind. I managed to get my car door shut and hit the locks, but Linda was outside now, still holding the knife, walking calmly around to the driver's side. She tapped on the window with the blade, leaving small scratches in the glass. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she called through the window, her voice now completely devoid of the warmth she'd shown earlier. "We just need you to come with us for a little while." The kids were already moving, unbuckling their seatbelts and reaching forward. The girl's small hands grabbed my hair, yanking my head back with surprising strength, while the boy wrapped his arm around my throat from behind. I managed to get my car door shut and hit the locks, but Linda was outside now, still holding the knife, walking calmly around to the driver's side. She opened the door and the kids scrambled toward her, moving with a coordination that was definitely not normal for children their age. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I floored the accelerator, tires spinning in the gravel as I tore out of that rest area. In my rearview mirror, I could see the three of them standing together, watching me leave. They weren't running or chasing. They were just standing there, perfectly calm, like they knew something I didn't. I drove for 2 hours straight before I felt safe enough to stop, finally pulling into a busy gas station in a town with actual traffic and people around. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold my phone as I called the police. When the officers arrived, they took my statement with expressions of polite skepticism. A family with a broken-down RV and kids who tried to attack me? It sounded crazy even to me as I said it. But they agreed to send a unit to check the area where I'd left Dave. 3 hours later, they called me back. There was no RV on that stretch of highway, no sign that anyone had ever broken down there. The rest area I described was empty except for some recent tire tracks that could have been from anyone. The strangest part came a week later when I was contacted by a detective from the Nevada State Police. 3 similar incidents had been reported over the past 6 months, all involving a family with a broken-down RV and a request for help that led to an attempted abduction. The descriptions matched perfectly: Dave, Linda, 2 older kids, and a toddler. But here's what really got to me. In each case, When police went to investigate, they found no trace of the RV or the family. No broken down vehicle, no evidence they'd ever been there. Like they materialized just long enough to lure in a good Samaritan, then vanish back into the desert. The detective said they suspected it was some kind of organized group, possibly using the family setup to target travelers who might be sympathetic to helping children. The duct tape around the toddler, the filed teeth, the coordination, it all suggested something planned and practiced. I never found out what happened to Dave, the man I left behind with the RV. Part of me wonders if there ever was a Dave, or if the whole breakdown scenario was just an elaborate trap. But sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through remote areas, I find myself scanning the roadside for broken down vehicles.
Story 2. The Midnight Photographer. Interstate 70 through Colorado is one of the most beautiful drives in America during the day, but at night it becomes something entirely different. Endless darkness punctuated by occasional truck stops, with the Rocky Mountains looming invisible on either side like sleeping giants. I was making the drive from Denver to Grand Junction in February 2020, heading to a mining conference that would determine whether my geology consulting firm would land its biggest contract yet. The weather had been brutal that week, a late winter storm that dumped 2 feet of snow across the state, followed by the kind of bitter cold that makes your car engine struggle to turn over. Most of the mountain passes had been closed for days, but I-70 had finally reopened that afternoon, and I needed to make the meeting. I left Denver around 8 p.m., figuring I'd arrive in Grand Junction by midnight, get a few hours of sleep, and be ready for my presentation in the morning. The first hour was fine. Traffic was light, the roads were clear, and my SUV handled the icy patches without trouble. But as I climbed into the mountains, the temperature started dropping fast. Around 10:30, just past the Eisenhower Tunnel, I saw the headlights in my rearview mirror. They were maybe half a mile back, keeping perfect pace with me as I navigated the winding mountain road. Not unusual. Lots of people drive this route at night, and it's natural to follow someone else's lead when visibility is poor and the roads are questionable. But after 20 minutes, those headlights were still there, maintaining the exact same distance. When I slowed down for a sharp curve, they slowed down. When I sped up on a straight stretch, they sped up. Always that same half-mile gap, like whoever was driving had calculated the perfect following distance. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia. Mountain driving at night can make anyone nervous, and it's easy to imagine patterns that aren't really there. But when I took the exit for a rest area near Vail Pass, hoping to stretch my legs and grab some coffee, those headlights followed me off the highway. The rest area was nearly empty. Just my SUV, a couple of semis parked in the truck section, and the vehicle that had been following me, which I could now see was a dark pickup truck. It pulled into a parking space about 50 yards away, engine running, headlights still on, but now pointed away from me toward the mountain slope. I got out and walked toward the main building, a small concrete structure with vending machines and restrooms. The cold hit me like a physical blow, probably 15 below zero, with a wind that cut through my jacket like it was made of tissue paper. I was maybe halfway to the building when I heard the pickup's door slam. Looking back, I saw a figure walking toward me. In the harsh glare of the security lights, I could make out a man in his 30s, wearing a heavy winter coat and carrying what looked like a professional camera with a large flash attachment. He moved with purpose, not the casual walk of someone stretching their legs, but the focused stride of someone with a specific destination in mind. "Excuse me," he called out when he was about 20 feet away. His voice carried easily in the thin mountain air. "I'm a photographer for National Geographic, and I'm documenting winter travel conditions. Would you mind if I got a few shots of you in your vehicle? The lighting here is perfect for what I'm trying to capture." Something about his request immediately felt wrong. National Geographic photographers don't typically work alone on random Colorado highways at 11 p.m. in sub-zero temperatures. More than that, there was something off about his demeanor, too eager, too intense for such a casual request. "I'm sorry," I said, continuing toward the building. "I'm in a hurry to get to Grand Junction, maybe another time." He followed me, his footsteps crunching in the snow. "It'll just take a minute. I really need shots of actual travelers, not staged photos. The magazine is doing a whole feature on winter road conditions, and your SUV is perfect, shows the ice buildup, the road salt residue." I glanced back at my vehicle and realized he was right about the details. My SUV was covered in the telltale signs of winter mountain driving: ice formations around the wheel wells, salt stains along the sides, snow packed in the bumper grills. Details that only someone who'd been watching carefully would notice. "How long have you been following me?" I asked, stopping just outside the rest area building. He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Following? I'm just driving the same route you are. I-70's pretty much the only way across the state right now with all the other passes closed." That was true, but it didn't explain the precise distance he'd maintained or how he'd ended up in this rest area at exactly the same time. I pulled out my phone to check for signal. Maybe I could call ahead to my hotel and let someone know where I was. No signal. Not surprising at this elevation, but it made me more aware of how isolated we were. The truckers were too far away to hear if I called for help, and this photographer was now standing between me and my SUV. "Look," he said, stepping closer, "I understand you're suspicious. People are these days, but I can show you my credentials, my National Geographic press pass. I just need a few quick shots and we can both get back on the road." He reached into his coat, and for a moment I thought he was going for identification. Instead, he pulled out the camera, a professional-looking DSLR with a flash that seemed unusually large. Without warning, he raised it and triggered the flash directly at my face. The burst of light was blindingly intense, nothing like a normal camera flash. It left me seeing spots, stumbling backward toward the building with my vision completely compromised. I could hear his footsteps moving quickly, but I couldn't see where he was going. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, blinking desperately to clear my vision. Another flash, this one from a different angle, then another. He was circling me, taking photos while I was effectively blind. But these weren't the quick snapshots of a travel photographer. Each flash was accompanied with the whir of what sounded like a motor drive, taking multiple shots in rapid succession. My vision started to clear just enough to see him maybe 10 feet away, camera raised again. But now I could see that what I'd thought was a camera flash was actually something else entirely. Some kind of industrial strobe light mounted on top of the camera, much more powerful than any photography equipment I'd ever seen. The next flash was so bright it felt like staring into the sun. I threw my arm up to protect my eyes and stumbled toward where I thought my SUV was parked. My keys were in my pocket, and if I could just get to the vehicle, I could lock myself in and drive away. But in my disoriented state, I'd gotten turned around. I was stumbling toward the mounting slope instead of the parking area, and with each step, the snow got deeper. Behind me, I could hear the photographer laughing, a sound that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with control. "You're going the wrong way," he called out, his voice coming from somewhere off to my left. "Your SUV's back here. Don't worry, I'm getting some fantastic shots of this. The way the snow reflects the light, the confusion on your face, this is exactly what the magazine wants." Another flash, and in the brief moment of illumination, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood freeze. Scattered around the parking area were what looked like personal items: a woman's purse, a child's stuffed animal, a pair of glasses, items that looked like they'd been dropped or abandoned in a hurry. The photographer noticed me looking. "Oh, those," he said casually. "Previous subjects. Not everyone appreciates art the way they should. Some people get very uncooperative when they realize this isn't really about travel photography." That's when I understood that this wasn't about photos at all. The camera, the flashes, the story about National Geographic, it was all just a way to disorient and control his victims. Whatever he was really doing, those personal items suggested that not everyone who encountered him made it back to their cars. I forced myself to stop moving and think. The parking area was behind me and slightly to the right. My SUV was parked near the entrance, maybe 50 yards away. If I could avoid looking at the flashes, if I could navigate by the sound of the idling engine and the faint glow of the headlights. The next time he triggered the strobe, I was ready. I kept my eyes closed and my head down, using the brief moment of illumination to fix my position relative to the landmarks I could remember. Then I ran. I could hear him behind me, his boots pounding through the snow, but I had a head start and the desperation of someone who knew this was life or death. The cold air burned my lungs as I sprinted across the uneven ground, dodging around the concrete barriers that marked the edge of the parking area. My SUV appeared in front of me like a miracle, engine still running from when I'd left it to warm up. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, hitting the locks before the photographer could reach me. He was there a second later, pounding on the passenger side window with something metallic, not the camera, but some kind of tool he'd pulled from his coat. The glass spire-webbed but held, and I threw the SUV in reverse, tires spinning on the ice as I backed away from him. In my headlights, I caught a final glimpse of his
The GPS said it would save me 45 minutes, cutting through the back roads instead of staying on the interstate. It was April 2021, and I was driving from Atlanta to Nashville for my cousin's wedding, running later than I'd planned after a work crisis had kept me at the office until 7 p.m. The wedding rehearsal was at 9 p.m., and I was supposed to be one of the groomsmen. I had made this drive a dozen times before, always taking I-75 to I-24, but never through the rural counties of northern Georgia and southern Tennessee. The GPS route looked straightforward enough, a series of state highways that would wind through small towns and farmland before connecting back to the interstate just south of Nashville. The first hour was actually pleasant. Rolling hills covered in early spring green, farmhouses with lights glowing warm in their windows, the occasional small town with a main street that looked like something from a Norman Rockwell painting. I was making good time, maybe even better than the GPS had predicted. Then I hit the construction zone. The orange signs appeared suddenly around a bend. Orange road work ahead, single lane traffic, delays expected. A line of cars was stopped in front of me, maybe a dozen vehicles waiting for whatever was causing the holdup. I checked my phone. 8:20 p.m. I could still make the rehearsal if this delay wasn't too long. The flagger who approached my car was a big man in his 50s, wearing a hard hat and high-visibility vest over what looked like work clothes. He had the weathered face of someone who'd spent most of his life working outdoors, and when he leaned down to my window, I could smell cigarettes and coffee on his breath. "How long's the delay?" I asked, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. He squinted at the line of cars behind me, then back at whatever construction work was happening ahead. "Hard to say. We got a water main break about a quarter mile up, roads completely washed out. Gonna be at least an hour, maybe 2 before we can let anyone through. 2 hours would make me miss the rehearsal entirely. Is there a detour? Another way around?" The flagger scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Well, there's an old logging road that cuts through the state forest.
Comes out about 10 miles north of here. It's not maintained, but it's passable if you got decent clearance. I was driving a Subaru Outback, which should handle rough roads reasonably well. Could you give me directions? Instead of giving verbal directions, he pulled out a folded piece of paper from his vest pocket. Here, he said, handing it to me. I had to draw this out for a few other folks tonight. Turn around, go back about 3 miles, look for the Forest Service marker on your right. Follow that road for about 12 miles, and it'll bring you back to pavement. The paper looked like it had been folded and unfolded many times, with pencil marks that had been traced over repeatedly. The directions were detailed, but hand-drawn, showing the logging road as a winding line through what was marked as Oconee National Forest. Are you sure this is safe to drive at night? I asked. The flagger nodded. Been sending people through all day. It's a little rough, but nothing your car can't handle. Just take it slow and you'll be fine. I thanked him and did a U-turn, heading back the way I'd come. 3 miles later, I found the Forest Service marker he'd mentioned, a brown wooden sign so weathered I could barely make out the text. The logging road beyond it looked like a dirt track disappearing into thick woods. The first few miles were exactly what I'd expected, a rough gravel road winding through dense forest with branches occasionally scraping against my windows. My headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the darkness, eliminating nothing but trees and the occasional reflective eyes of wildlife watching from the underbrush. But as I drove deeper into the forest, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. Fresh tire tracks in the soft dirt, far more than I would have expected from a few other folks being detoured through here today. Deep ruts that suggested heavy vehicles, trucks, or equipment that had no business being on a logging road in a national forest. Then I saw the lights. About 5 miles in, through the trees on my left, I caught glimpses of bright white lights, the kind used for night construction work. They were maybe half a mile off the road, but in the dense forest, it was hard to tell exactly how far. The lights were moving, sweeping back and forth like searchlights, or the headlights of vehicles driving in formation. I stopped the car and rolled down my window, listening. In the distance, I could hear the rumble of heavy machinery, diesel engines, hydraulic systems, the beeping sound that trucks make when backing up. A lot of machinery, working late at night in the middle of a national forest where construction work should be illegal. The paper with the directions was on my passenger seat, and I picked it up to check my progress. According to the hand-drawn map, I was maybe halfway through the detour, but looking at the paper more carefully now, I noticed something I'd missed before. The pencil marks weren't just drawn once, they'd been traced over and over, like someone had been using the same piece of paper for weeks or months. More than that, there were small notations along the route in different handwriting. Times, dates, what looked like license plate numbers. And at the bottom, in block letters that had been written over so many times they were almost embossed in the paper, Phase 2 complete, proceed to staging area. This wasn't a detour map. This was something else entirely. I was about to turn around when headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. Another car had followed the same route, probably given the same directions by the same flagger. I felt a moment of relief. At least I wasn't alone on this increasingly creepy forest road. But when I started driving again, it followed me, maintaining the same distance. When I slowed down to navigate a particularly rough section, it slowed down too. Always staying back, always watching. The lights through the trees were getting brighter and more frequent now. I could see them on both sides of the road, and the sound of machinery was getting louder. Whatever construction work was happening out there, it was big. Too big for a simple road repair or forest maintenance. That's when I saw the checkpoint. 2 pickup trucks were parked across the logging road, their headlights creating a barrier of light that was impossible to miss. Men in hard hats and safety vests stood beside the trucks, but these weren't the kind of construction workers you'd see fixing a water main. They were too organized, too military in their bearing. One of them was carrying what looked like a clipboard, while another had something that definitely wasn't construction equipment, a device with an antenna that he was pointing at my approaching car. I slowed to a stop about 20 yards from the checkpoint, my heart pounding as I tried to figure out what I'd stumbled into. The man with the clipboard walked towards my car with the same confident stride the flagger had used, but there was nothing casual about his approach. This was someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Evening," he said, when I rolled down my window. "We need to see your authorization paperwork." "I'm sorry, what? I don't have any paperwork. I was just following a detour around some construction work." The man's expression didn't change. "Sir, this is a restricted area. No unauthorized vehicles are permitted beyond this point. I need to see your clearance documentation." "I don't have any clearance. The flagger back on the main road gave me directions through here. He said it was a detour." Now the man looked genuinely confused. He stepped back from my car and spoke quietly into a radio clipped to his vest. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could see other men moving around the checkpoint, and the car that had been following me had stopped just far enough back to block any retreat. After a few minutes of radio conversation, the man returned to my window. "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle. There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding that we need to clear up." Every instinct in my body was screaming that stepping out of the car would be a mistake. Whatever this operation was, I'd clearly stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. The lights in the forest, the machinery, the checkpoint with armed men asking for authorization paperwork. "I think there's been a mistake," I said. "Putting my car in reverse, I'll just head back the way I came." "Sir, I need you to turn off your engine and step out of the vehicle. Now." The man's hand moved to his belt, and I saw something that made my decision easy. He wasn't carrying construction tools. He was carrying a sidearm. I floored the accelerator in reverse, my car shooting backward towards the vehicle that had been following me. The driver had left enough room that I could swerve around him, my car sliding sideways on the loose gravel as I spun it around to face the way I'd come. In my rearview mirror, I could see men running to trucks, shouting into radios. But I had a head start, and I knew they'd have to coordinate before pursuing me. I drove that forest road faster than anyone should drive in the dark, my car bouncing over ruts and scraping against overhanging branches. It took me 20 minutes to reach the main road, and when I did, there was no construction zone, no orange signs, no flagger, no line of stopped cars, just empty pavement stretching in both directions under the highway lights. I drove straight through to Nashville without stopping, made it to the rehearsal with minutes to spare, told my cousin I'd had car trouble, which wasn't entirely a lie, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen in that forest. The lights, the machinery, the checkpoint with armed men asking for authorization paperwork. The next day, I called the Forest Service to report unauthorized construction activity in the Oconee National Forest. The ranger I spoke to said they had no record of any permitted work in that area, and certainly nothing that would require night operations or restrict public access to the logging roads. A week later, I got a call from someone claiming to be with the Georgia Environmental Protection Division.